The history of indigenous peoples in North America is often summarized in simplified terms such as modernization or integration into Western society. In reality, the process was neither linear nor voluntary. It was a long and complex collapse shaped by disease, forced displacement, warfare, and cultural suppression, unfolding over several centuries. After the arrival of Europeans in the late 15th century, indigenous societies experienced their first and most devastating shock not through direct military conflict, but through biology. Diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza spread rapidly among populations with no prior immunity. In many regions, mortality rates reached catastrophic levels, with estimates of population loss ranging from 70% to 90%. Entire communities disappeared, social structures broke down, and traditional leadership systems were severely disrupted. This phase was not a controlled transformation, but an uncontrolled demographic collapse that fundamentally weakened indigenous civilizations. As populations declined, European settlers expanded further into the continent. Land seizure did not simply mean territorial loss. It meant the destruction of entire ways of life. Hunting grounds, migration routes, sacred sites, and resource systems were taken over or rendered inaccessible. As a result, indigenous economies, which were deeply tied to the land, began to collapse. This created dependency and instability long before formal state policies were fully implemented. By the 19th century, expansionist policies of the United States marked a turning point. In 1830, legislation was passed that authorized the forced removal of several indigenous nations from their ancestral territories. Entire communities were compelled to relocate over long distances under harsh conditions. During these forced migrations, exposure, starvation, and disease caused significant loss of life. This period represents one of the most direct examples of state-driven displacement in American history. Following these removals, surviving indigenous groups were confined to designated reservation areas. These territories were often geographically limited and economically unsustainable, making traditional subsistence patterns difficult or impossible to maintain. As a result, many communities experienced long-term poverty and structural dependency. Cultural practices continued, but under increasingly restricted conditions. In the early 20th century, pressure shifted from physical displacement to cultural assimilation. Indigenous children were frequently removed from their families and placed in boarding schools where native languages and traditions were actively suppressed. The goal was not only territorial control, but also the gradual erasure of indigenous identity through forced cultural replacement. Today, indigenous peoples in the Americas have not disappeared. Many nations continue to exist, preserve their languages, and assert political and cultural rights. However, the historical process that shaped their present condition cannot be accurately described as simple modernization. It is better understood as a prolonged period of disruption